Right now, in warehouses across the Midwest, distributors are quietly raising the floor price on items most Americans walk past every single week. The shelves still look full, the lights are still bright, but the contracts behind those shelves have already shifted, and the prices you see today are not the prices you will see in 90 days. 11 items, a combined retail increase north of 43% in the last 4 years, a pattern that has been building since the spring of 2020 and accelerates every quarter the dollar weakens. This affects nearly every American household, and almost no one is talking about it. The stores that look stocked are masking the shift by reducing package sizes, rotating brands, and quietly discontinuing the cheapest tiers. You have probably noticed it without naming it. The bag is lighter, the can is smaller, the price is higher. That is not coincidence. That is policy. One of the 11 items on this list has been used as currency for over 4,000 years. One of them costs less than $3 today and will be worth more than its weight in silver during a sustained disruption. And one of them is sitting in your kitchen right now in a form so common you have never thought of it as valuable. You will by the end of this. Let's begin. Number 11, white rice. A 20-pound bag of long grain white rice at Sam's Club ran about $8.48 in 2019. The same bag today is hovering between $17 and $19 depending on region. That is roughly a 100% increase in 5 years, and the trajectory is not flattening. Brigham Young University's food storage research, which is some of the most rigorous civilian shelf life testing in the country, has documented properly stored white rice remaining edible and nutritionally viable for over 30 years when sealed in mylar with oxygen absorbers and kept below 75 degrees 30 years. From a bag that used to cost less than $9. The supply chain story behind rice is the part most people miss. India, which supplies roughly 40% of the global rice trade, imposed export restrictions on non-basmati white rice in July of 2023. Those restrictions were partially lifted, then reimposed, then modified again. Every time the policy shifts, American wholesalers adjust their forward contracts, and those adjustments reach your grocery store about 6 to 10 weeks later. The mainstream financial press does not cover this consistently because rice is considered a low-margin staple, and low-margin staples do not generate advertising revenue. The story is structural, not sensational, so it gets ignored until the shelf is empty. What you do with this information is simple. Buy 2 20-pound bags now, store one in its original packaging in a cool, dry location for rotation over the next 12 months. Take the second bag, divide it into 1-gallon Mylar bags with 300 cubic centimeter oxygen absorbers, seal them, and store them in a food-grade bucket. You have just converted $19 into a 30-year asset. But the next item on this list is something most Americans throw away without realizing what it actually represents. Number 10, salt, plain, iodized, granulated table salt. A 2.6-ounce canister of Morton's was about 68 cents in 2019. Today it ranges from $1.48 to over $2 depending on the chain. That is more than a 100% increase on what is functionally a mined mineral with effectively unlimited shelf life. The USDA does not assign an expiration date to pure salt because pure salt does not expire. It has been pulled from Roman shipwrecks, still usable, after 2,000 years underwater in sealed containers. Salt is on this list because of what happened in Rome. Roman soldiers were partially paid in salt rations. The word salary comes from the Latin word for salt. There is a reason civilizations treated this mineral as currency for thousands of years, and that reason has not changed. Salt preserves meat. Salt cures fish. Salt makes bland calories palatable, which matters more than people realize when the variety of food in a household collapses. Salt is also one of the only items on this list that the human body physically cannot survive without for extended periods. The supply chain layer is this. North American salt production is concentrated in a small number of mining operations. Winter road salt demand pulls from the same supply chains that feed food-grade salt. When a hard winter hits the Northeast, food-grade salt prices have historically spiked the following spring. Buy 10 pounds of plain, non-iodized salt for long-term storage and 10 pounds of iodized for daily use. Total cost under $25. You will never need to buy salt again in your lifetime. And that brings us to something even more essential, something your body needs every single day in larger quantities than food. Number 9, water filtration. Not bottled water, filtration. A Berkey-style gravity filter system ran about $275 in 2019. The same configuration today is over $420. The company that made Berkey filters was forced to halt sales in multiple states in 2023 after an Environmental Protection Agency registration dispute that has not been fully resolved. That regulatory action removed one of the most trusted civilian water filtration brands from large portions of the American market, and the replacement options are more expensive and less proven. A quality ceramic and carbon block filter can process between 3,000 and 6,000 gallons of water before replacement, depending on source quality. That is years of drinking water for a family of 4 from a single filter element that costs under $60. The non-obvious use case is this. Most preppers think of water filtration for disasters. The actual daily value is filtering municipal tap water that contains chlorine byproducts, trace pharmaceuticals, and in many American cities, lead from aging service lines. The Flint crisis was not an isolated event. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave U.S. drinking water infrastructure a C- in its most recent report card, with an estimated $1.2 trillion funding gap over the next 20 years. Buy a gravity-fed system with 2 replacement filter elements. Store the spares sealed in original packaging. You have now secured potable water for a decade, regardless of what happens to your municipal supply. But water is only useful if you can heat it, cook with it, and preserve what you eat, which leads us to the next item. Number 8, cooking oil. A 4.8-ounce bottle of Crisco vegetable oil was $3.28 in 2019. The same bottle today is between $6 and $7.50. That is an increase of over 100%, and cooking oil is one of the most volatile commodities in the global food trade. The Russia-Ukraine conflict disrupted roughly 80% of global sunflower oil exports starting in 2022. That disruption cascaded into palm oil, soybean oil, and canola oil pricing as buyers scrambled for substitutes. Cooking oil shelf life is shorter than most items on this list, which is why people overlook it. Refined vegetable oil stored in a cool, dark location remains usable for about 2 years. Coconut oil, because of its saturated fat structure, stores for 3 to 5 years and resists rancidity far better than seed oils. The non-obvious use case for coconut oil is fuel. A simple wick in a small jar of coconut oil produces a clean, burning emergency lamp that lasts for hours. The same jar cooks food, moisturizes skin, and treats minor wounds. 1 product, 4 functions, 5-year shelf life. The mainstream food press will not tell you this clearly because the cooking oil industry spends enormous amounts on advertising and food media. The structural incentive is to keep you buying refined seed oils on a continuous replacement cycle. Not to inform you that coconut oil and properly stored lard outlast them by years. Buy 2 large jars of refined coconut oil, store them sealed in a pantry below 70 degrees. You have just secured cooking fat through 2029. And speaking of fats and proteins, the next item on this list has quietly become one of the most manipulated commodities in the American grocery store. Number 7, canned meat. A 1-2-ounce can of Spam was $2.50 in 2019. Today it runs between $4.25 and $5.50, depending on chain and region. Hormel, the manufacturer, reported in recent Securities and Exchange Commission filings that input costs for pork have risen sharply due to consolidation in American slaughterhouses, with 4 companies now controlling roughly 85% of beef processing and a similarly concentrated structure in pork. That concentration is not a conspiracy. It is documented in USDA reports and Department of Justice inquiries dating back to 2020. Canned meat has a USDA recommended shelf life of 2 to 5 years for taste quality. The actual food safety window extends well beyond that when cans are stored in cool, stable conditions. Civil defense food caches from the 1960s have been opened and tested in the last decade, with canned meat still safe to consume, though degraded in flavor. That is 60 years from a can. The historical parallel here is the Great Depression. Households that had cured and canned meat in the root cellars and pantries did not just eat better, they traded. A can of meat in 1,933 inches. A rural community was a unit of barter, exchangeable for labor, for repairs, for other foods. That dynamic returns in any sustained shortage, and it returns faster than people expect. Buy a case of canned chicken, a case of canned tuna, and a case of Spam or similar shelf-stable pork. Total investment under $150. Total shelf life, realistically, 20 years or more if stored correctly, but the next item is something almost no one stockpiles, and they will regret it when the moment arrives. Number 6, coffee. A 1-pound bag of Folgers ground coffee was about $7 in 2019. Today, it is over $12 in most markets, and futures contracts for arabica beans hit a 4-7-year high in late 2024, driven by drought in Brazil, which produces nearly 40% of the world's coffee, and frost damage in Vietnam, which dominates Robusta production. The International Coffee Organization has projected a global supply deficit for the 3rd consecutive year. Coffee is on this list not because it is a survival nutrient. It is on this list because of behavior. In every documented period of economic hardship in the last 100 years, coffee consumption did not decrease. It increased. During World War II, rationing in the United States, coffee was one of the first items rationed and one of the most aggressively traded on informal markets. People will give up many things before they give up their morning ritual, which means coffee functions as one of the most reliable barter items in any disruption scenario. Vacuum-sealed whole bean coffee, stored in mylar with oxygen absorbers in a cool location, remains drinkable for 2 to 3 years and tradable for much longer. Instant coffee in sealed glass jars has been tested at over 20 years of shelf life with minimal flavor degradation. Buy 5 pounds of whole bean and 2 large jars of quality instant. Store them properly. You have just acquired what may be the single most reliable barter currency on this list outside of the climax item. And that brings us to something even more concerning, because the next item is one the food industry is actively reformulating without telling you. Number 5, honey. A 1-2-ounce bottle of pure honey was about $4.50 in 2019. Today, the same bottle from a domestic source runs between $8 and $12, and here is what the labels do not tell you. A 2022 European Union investigation found that nearly 46% of honey imported from outside the EU was adulterated with sugar syrups. Subsequent testing in the United States has produced similar findings, with significant portions of cheap retail honey containing rice syrup, corn syrup, or beet syrup undisclosed on the label. The Food and Drug Administration has been slow to act because honey adulteration is difficult to detect without specialized isotope testing. Pure honey does not expire. Archaeologists opened sealed jars of honey in Egyptian tombs that were over 3,000 years old and found the honey still edible 3,000 years. The reason is honey's low water content and natural hydrogen peroxide production, which prevent microbial growth indefinitely. The non-obvious use case is medical. Honey has been used as a wound dressing for thousands of years, and modern clinical research has confirmed medical-grade honey accelerates healing in burns and chronic wounds. The Mayo Clinic and multiple peer-reviewed journals have documented this. Buy raw, unfiltered honey from a local apiary or a verified domestic producer. Spend the extra money. 3 pounds of genuine raw honey for around $50 gives you a sweetener, a preservative, a wound treatment, and a barter item with effectively unlimited shelf life. The mainstream food press does not push this story because the major honey brands rely on import blending to keep retail prices accessible, and exposing the adulteration problem damages the entire category. The incentive is silence. But the next item on this list is something the average American household wastes over $200 worth of every single year. Number 4, dried beans. A 1-pound bag of pinto beans was about $1.10 in 2019. Today, it is between $2.20 and $3 depending on region. That is a doubling of price on what is, ounce for ounce, the most calorically and nutritionally dense shelf-stable food available to the American consumer. Dried beans stored properly in mylar with oxygen absorbers have been tested edible at over 30 years. BYU Food Storage Research has documented beans from the 1970s still cooking up usable, though requiring longer soak times. The supply chain story is American. The northern plains, particularly North Dakota and Minnesota, produce the majority of American dry edible beans. Acreage planted has declined as farmers shift to more profitable row crops like corn and soybeans subsidized through federal programs. The USDA's own data shows dry bean acreage down significantly over the last decade. Less domestic production means more import dependence, which means more price volatility. The historical parallel is Argentina in the early 2000s. During the 2001 economic collapse and currency crisis, families that had stockpiled dried beans, rice, and basic grains did not just survive. They ate 3 meals a day while their neighbors stood in lines at soup kitchens. The Argentine peso lost roughly 75% of its value against the dollar in months. Beans did not lose value. Beans gained value. Buy 20 pounds of pinto beans, 20 pounds of black beans, and 10 pounds of lentils. Total cost under $100. Store in Mylar with oxygen absorbers and food-grade buckets. You have just secured roughly 50,000 calories of complete protein for under $100 with a shelf life that may outlast you. But the next item is one most people do not even think of as food. Number 3, powdered milk. A 1-pound box of non-fat dry milk was about $8 in 2019. Today it is between $14 and $18, and this is one of the most overlooked storage foods in the American market. Properly packaged non-fat powdered milk stored in Mylar with oxygen absorbers has been documented by BYU LDS food storage research to remain palatable and nutritionally viable for 20 years or more. 20 years of milk from a sealed container. The supply chain story is dairy consolidation. American dairy farms have closed at a rate of roughly 5% to 7% per year over the last decade. The USDA reported the loss of thousands of licensed dairy operations between 2003 and 2023. Fewer dairies means more reliance on industrial-scale producers, which means more vulnerability when something goes wrong at a single major facility. The 2022 infant formula crisis, triggered by a single plant shutdown in Michigan, demonstrated how fragile this consolidation has made the entire dairy chain. The non-obvious use case is calcium and protein density in shortage scenarios where fresh dairy is unavailable. Children, pregnant women, and the elderly suffer first and worst when calcium and protein intake drops. Powdered milk reconstitutes into something usable for cooking, baking, drinking, and supplementing other foods. Buy 10 pounds of non-instant, non-fat powdered milk stored in Mylar in a cool, dry location. You have just secured the calcium and protein nutrition of dozens of gallons of milk that will not exist in a sustained disruption. But the next item on this list addresses something even more fundamental than food, and the price has moved more dramatically than almost anything else on this list. Number 2, over-the-counter medication. Specifically ibuprofen, acetaminophen, aspirin, and basic antibiotics for fish and animal use that share active ingredients with human formulations. A 1,000 count bottle of generic ibuprofen was about $9 in 2019. Today it is between $16 and $22 at major retailers, and the supply chain story here is the most alarming on the list. Over 80% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients used in American medications are produced overseas, primarily in China and India. The FDA's own commissioner has testified to Congress about the strategic vulnerability this creates. The shelf life data on these medications contradicts what the labels say. The Department of Defense, facing the costs of replacing millions of dollars of stockpiled medications every 2 years, commissioned the Shelf Life Extension Program with the FDA. The program tested expired medications and found that the vast majority retained over 90% of their potency for years, sometimes decades, past the printed expiration date. Ibuprofen, acetaminophen, and many antibiotics tested stable for 10 to 15 years past their labeled expiration when stored in cool, dry conditions in original sealed packaging. The reason the labels say 2 years is regulatory liability, not chemistry. The mainstream medical press does not communicate this clearly. The pharmaceutical industry has no incentive to inform consumers that their products last 5 times longer than the label claims. The structural incentive is replacement, not storage. Buy bulk bottles of generic ibuprofen, acetaminophen, aspirin, and a basic antihistamine like loratadine, store sealed in a cool, dark location. You have just secured a decade of basic medical care for under $100. But the most important item on this list is something you almost certainly already have in your home, in a form you have never recognized as the asset it actually is. Number 1, salt's older, quieter cousin, sugar. Not just any sugar. Plain white granulated cane sugar, the most ordinary item in the American pantry. A 4-pound bag of Domino sugar was $1.98 in 2019. Today it is between $3.98 and $5.50 depending on region. That is a price increase north of 100% on a product that has been used as a preservative, a currency, a medicine, and a strategic resource for over 4,000 years. Egyptian, Persian, and Indian records document sugar trade as a controlled commodity going back to roughly 500 BC. Sugarcane plantations financed empires. Wars were fought over sugar islands in the Caribbean. The British Empire's economic structure was partially built on sugar. Pure white granulated sugar stored in airtight containers in a cool, dry location does not expire. There is no realistic shelf life ceiling. Sugar pulled from sealed containers after 30, 40, 50 years remains chemically identical to the day it was packaged, provided it stayed dry. The USDA recognizes sugar as one of a small handful of foods with effectively indefinite shelf life when properly stored. The supply chain layer is this. American sugar production is protected by federal price supports and tariff rate quotas that limit imports and stabilize domestic pricing. When those structures shift, and they have been shifting under recent trade renegotiations, retail sugar prices move sharply. The 2023 to 2024 period saw global sugar futures hit multi-year highs driven by drought in India and Thailand, and that pressure has not fully released. The non-obvious use cases are what make sugar the climax of this list. Sugar preserves fruit indefinitely when used in proper concentrations, which is how every generation before refrigeration kept summer harvest through winter. Sugar is an active wound treatment. Battlefield medics from the American Civil War through World War I packed sugar into deep wounds. The high osmotic pressure draws moisture out of bacteria and prevents infection. Modern clinical research has validated this. Sugar is required to ferment, and fermentation produces alcohol, vinegar, and preserved foods. Sugar is also one of the most universally accepted barter items in every documented hyperinflation case study, from Weimar Germany to 1990s, Yugoslavia to 2000s, Zimbabwe to 2010s, Venezuela. People trade for sugar when currencies fail. They always have. Here is the single most surprising thing about sugar. It is sitting in your kitchen right now, probably in a paper bag, probably exposed to humidity, probably treated as an afterthought. Take it out tonight. Transfer it into airtight Mylar bags or food-grade plastic containers with tight seals. Store 20 pounds of plain white sugar in your pantry. Total cost under $30. You have just created a multi-decade asset that functions as food, as medicine, as preservative, and as barter currency. All from a product so ordinary, you have walked past it 10,000 times without seeing it for what it is. That is the realization that reframes this entire list. The most valuable items in a disruption are not exotic. They are not specialized. They are not expensive. They are the items so common that almost no one bothers to secure them, which is exactly why the people who do secure them end up holding something the rest of the market suddenly needs. If you are the kind of person who walks through a grocery store and sees the small changes other people miss, the lighter bags, the smaller cans, the quietly discontinued brands, then you already understand what this list is really about. It is not about fear. It is about pattern recognition. It is about acting on what you already know to be true before the rest of the market figures it out. Tell me one thing in the comments. Of the 11 items on this list, which one is already in your pantry in a quantity you would call serious? Rice, salt, sugar, beans, coffee, honey, oil, canned meat, powdered milk, medication, or water filtration? Just the name. I read every answer. If this is the kind of thinking that makes sense to you, the kind of calm, documented, dollar-grounded preparation that does not require panic to take seriously, then subscribe and stay close. The next list covers 7 items that disappeared from American shelves during the 2020 disruption, have quietly never come back at the same price, and one of them is in your bathroom right now.